Jeremy Pryor, welcome to the Connect Man podcast. We are excited about this conversation. As David showed you ahead of time, we both have read Family Revision, have copies. I have underlined stars, circles throughout the book, and I'm excited about diving in. Um, I was actually thinking about you this weekend. Uh, it's not weird, I promise. I coach my son's little league baseball team. He's 6, and we were in the playoffs. I don't know how we got to the playoffs because we were 0 and 14 uh, before
Nice.
starting the playoffs. But in this day and age, everyone gets a trophy, so we made it to the playoffs. We lost game one. It's a double elimination, and we were in the second game. And our team has changed dramatically throughout the season. We've basically got run ruled almost every game. But at the end of the season, we were kind of starting to pull it together. And this last game, uh, they just turned it on. Like they were a completely different team. And like they were scoring runs. I think we scored 17 total runs, which is more than we've scored the entire season of combined games. And we were winning. We ended up losing the game. The other team came back, but like for a period of time, like the crowd was involved. I looked out. My daughter was there. My older daughter was there. My mom, their grandma was there. My mom, my wife, like the whole family was there, and they were just like cheering, and like it was just like this dynamic family, team rooting on my 6-year-old son playing baseball. And in that moment, like I just thought about your book and just how this team dynamic, this family team dynamic of rooting on, my 6-year-old son
Well,
in the
then they
playoffs.
lost and your family all dispersed
They
and left you
dispersed. They were
guys
like,
hanging, and they're
"See
like,
ya."
this guy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I was your book has had a major impact on my thought process and just the way I'm starting to look differently at how I show up as a husband, as a father, as a man. And so I'm excited about diving into your book and into your story, into your mission.
That's awesome, Stu. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it makes me wonder too, how much do we, love sports because it reminds us of family, or the other way around. Like it's like you get to have this microcosm experience in a sport of all this unity, all this clarity. And I really think that what we're loving about that, people don't connect these dots, but this is why God made the family so that we could experience that. And so it's a great place to really build up that desire and to have those inklings like what you guys had with that game. You're like, oh, this is like the good life that God's designed us for. Imagine if the team that you got to live life with, instead of coming and going and changing every season, imagine getting to live life with a team that is learning how to win for decades and decades, or even generations. That's sort of the dream, right? That we have for family, and that God really has given us in creating families the way He did. So yeah, that's a really, those moments are so important.
Well, yeah, and Jeremy, I want you to tell us about yourself, but something you just said also struck a chord. One of the things I love about sports, and we did not intend to make this a sports and family revision book, but what's fascinating to me, what I see a lot, so I'm a head coach for I have 3 children, and my middle guy, 11-year-old, I coach his tackle football team and then flag football. And one of the things that I've seen on the other side of that is I've started to take my role as potentially the father figure for a lot of these kids very, very seriously. And to be able to talk about, and you in your book, you break down the family roles, and the father one in particular hit me in a lot of different ways that we'll talk about. But one of them is also living that outside the house with a recognition. One of the stats you highlight, and I think is pretty well known now, is 60% of households, 60% of households, children grow up without a father, and the impact that makes to the family as God designed it. And in sports, there's an opportunity to pour into these kids, and oftentimes with something like football, I have probably 3 more years with them before they go to high school and play. But just that role and how it's broken down is so significant. And sports can give a very cheap, very short version of that. But I'll tell you, that very cheap, very short version is sometimes the only version that a lot of these kids have, particularly these young
Yes.
boys.
Oh man. Yeah. it's tough because you only grow up in one kind of family, and then all of a sudden you're getting older and you're like, I want to try to figure out how to be a father. And for so many men in particular, the way that I try to help them understand the essence of fatherhood is to ask them, have you ever had a great coach in your life? And give me, words to describe what that was like. What is a great coach like? And I think that if Abraham were to somehow get into a time machine and come to our time, once he got over all the understandable shocks, I think he would find himself relating far more to the head coach of a sports team in terms of his role as father than he would a modern Western dad. And this is something that I think we have to be aware of. And I do think that that allows us to have this incredible training ground for building up our own fatherhood by coaching, like you're doing, David. And then also it gives us an opportunity, like you're saying, to actually help, you know, fatherless kids experience fatherhood. And I wish that the dots were a little bit more clear, because I think sometimes, you know, then sometimes kids get obsessed with sports and then they don't really think about raising a family. And so part of what we want to do is connect those dots. This is what you're experiencing with good coaching is simply good fathering. And what we want to begin to try to promote or try to lean into as men is, and I go to coaching books to learn about fatherhood. I go to like coaching interviews, and, you know, like biographies about coaches. These have been more helpful to me than almost anything I've ever read about fatherhood, because I think that it's far closer, at least in the modern world, to the way the Bible describes fatherhood.
Yeah, that's powerful. I actually don't play with footballs. I have dolls. And the kids have to carry them in an effective manner. 5 points of
Nice.
contact. Don't drop the baby. So I try to incorporate some of that fatherhood training. I'm
There
joking.
you
That'd
go.
be that'd be really weird. But Jeremy, tell us about you, please.
Yeah, so I'm a dad. I'm a grandfather. I got 5 kids, one grandson, two more on the way. Two of my adult kids are already married. And so in my journey, I grew up in the Seattle area, and my wife and I actually met in Jerusalem. And that's kind of where I encountered a totally different, just blew my mind, different vision for family. And so I never recovered from that. Came back. I was in ministry for about 8 years, and then decided to jump into the entrepreneurial world. And I've been there for the last, like 22 years. Started a bunch of different businesses. A lot of them, experimenting with how do you maximally integrate family and business. So I've done that a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've tried a lot of experiments that didn't work. I've tried a lot of experiments that worked really well and were incredibly helpful. And now we've spent a lot of our time. We've got, real estate. We've got, a lot of ministry activity that we do as a family, and so yeah, it's a very full life here in northern Kentucky. We live just south of Cincinnati, Ohio.
That's awesome. Hey, you referenced Abraham a little bit earlier, and then you talked about your experience in Jerusalem where you met your wife. Can you give us a little bit more details on what you've seen? And your book references a lot, but what you've seen. What's the difference between a family over there um, versus a family you now see in Western society?
Yeah, well, one of the greatest things about any kind of traveling abroad to different cultures is you get to have, for the first time, you kind of see your own culture through a different lens. Like, when you're just living your own culture, you're like, this is just normal. This is what fatherhood is. This is what family is. This is what motherhood is. This is what sonship is, or whatever. So, having grown up in Seattle, Seattle, I think, was the first city in the country with more dogs than children. I was mostly working with public school kids, through youth ministry. And so I just saw so much brokenness, and, family just looked like this experiment that had gone off the rails. And a lot of people that I knew were opting out. They were, deciding to, just do live-in stuff or whatever. I was, trying to, really follow Jesus. And so I wanted to get married. There was some clear benefits, to getting married that I was excited about, but I wasn't that excited about being a dad. Like that wasn't something that I was passionate about. And so when I first came to Jerusalem, the thing that really shocked me was how much I saw men with children. So saw it in the airplane, saw it, as you just walk around the city. And I remember one day I was just sitting on a bench and I watched a group of dads walk past, all of them pushing strollers with little kids in tow. And I just was like, that's so weird. Like I've never seen that before. I've seen mommy brigades. I've never seen a daddy brigade. There's even a crosswalk sign that I show people of a dad pushing a stroller with a bunch of little kids. And this is like, watch out for this, because this is a very common scene in Jerusalem. So I just started asking the question, why are these men so into kids? And specifically, why do they want to be fathers? And I honestly, my first thought was they don't know that it sucks. Like they don't know how hard it is. Like I just assumed I knew better and they would eventually grow up and become a jaded person like I was. But then I started, wondering, well, I'm in a different culture. Maybe I should, be a little more curious. So I started asking some Jewish and Arab fathers to talk to me about their understanding of fatherhood. And I was just shocked. Like I said, I've never gotten over it. Like they started presenting a vision for fatherhood that I'd never considered before. I didn't even know anybody who had ever really talked about it before. And it was that they, each of them saw themselves, when they think about fatherhood, they saw themselves as part of a multi-generational family line. And their whole vision for how to think about family was founded in the person of Abraham in the Bible. And I was like, I had never thought about that before. I don't know what it would look like, or what it would be like to see fatherhood primarily founded through that lens. So I started to imagine that. And what was really weird is that I had actually spent a semester studying the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, with the top like Abrahamic scholar that I knew in the country. And we exclusively were trying to look at the Torah through the lens of Abraham. And we talked about Abraham constantly in this intensive course I took. It was a graduate level course. We'd never once mentioned him as a father. And so this was like, I was very much like, if God sets people up for like, a massive shock, like I was set up really well for this. And so I was just like, wait a minute, is this true? So I'm looking at a Jewish culture and their families are thriving. Their divorce rate in the Orthodox community is a fraction of what it is in the West. Same thing within the Arab community. They both see Abraham as this model father. Jesus himself, when he referenced Abraham, in the New Testament, he calls him Father Abraham. Part of it is the Hebrew. You hear the word father every time you say Abraham in Hebrew. And I was studying Hebrew. So Avram, his original name, means exalted father. Or I think one way to think about that is like meta father. He's not the perfect father. He's the perfect description in a narrative form of how God interacts with the essence of fatherhood. And so all of those things, including Abraham's problems and struggles, I think are revealed to us through this character. And then his name changes to Abraham, Abraham, which means father of many nations. And what was really weird about the way Abraham saw family was that he was way more interested in his descendants than anything else. Like he was pleading with God to make his descendants successful. And God's way of handling that was to bless Abraham and promise him that his descendants would be like the sand in the seashore, the stars in the sky. And so he was obsessed with this idea of building a multi-generational family. And they were always working together. He was constantly training. He had 318 trained men in his household. And so this idea of like his work was nested underneath fatherhood. His vision for the future was nested under fatherhood. He was interacting with God and making covenants with God on the basis of his leading of this family. In fact, when scholars look at Abraham's life, he looks like a king, like in terms of his wealth, his power, the army that he wielded. There's one story where he actually conquers 5 kings. But he didn't see himself that way. He saw himself as a father. Like this ruling he was doing was all underneath this one hat of fatherhood. So you can imagine a whole culture of men who are taking from Abraham their model for what it meant to build a family and to think of themselves as a father. And so I've constantly been trying to understand that. I've read and kind of discussed and done lots of studies on Abraham with other fathers to try to just like get this DNA deep inside of me. And it is really life changing.
Well, and he was a young father. He had a bunch of kids to start with as a reference point, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
people don't know, the story of
Right.
Abraham. A lot of people don't. I think it's a fascinating detail that I had not previously considered, but it's not like he was born into that,
No.
right? He
Yeah.
didn't start young.
Right.
And it wasn't even a guarantee. I think that part is fascinating. I don't know if you mind talking a little bit about that, but I imagine that plays into this story as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. He was older, probably in his 80s when he first left his father's house. Now, this was very normal back then. You live life in tribes, and so it wasn't kind of like today where it's like, hey, Abraham has failure to launch problems. It's like very different culture. And Isaac never left Abraham, and they worked as a team their whole life. So, but Abraham was called by God to leave at a pretty old age, like you're describing, David. So he was much older. He desperately wanted to have a child. His wife was barren, and so this is a big part of the story because the level of faith and trust he had to have in God to believe that there was nothing more meaningful in his life than to bear a son and to see his descendants after him and to see that he's getting older and older and older. His wife's getting older and older, and there's no kids. And just the grief that this created for Abraham and Sarah, and the ultimate incredible like joy. The reason why they called Isaac Isaac is because it means laughter. They couldn't. It was like an explosive joy when they finally had a son. And there's of course a whole side story that occurred with regards to this woman Hagar and the boy Ishmael that Abraham also had as a son. And we've been living in a kind of a story in the world ever since of two brothers. And this is a huge theme of Genesis. It's really unveiling the nature of sort of like how the world works at the deepest level. And you see that with Cain and Abel. You see that with Ishmael and Isaac, with Jacob and Esau, with Joseph and his 12 brothers. So there's so much going on in Genesis. It's like so multifaceted, multi-layered. But yeah, what you're describing, David, it's not a simple story. It's not like his young father and everything worked out great. Man, there's all kinds of tragedies and struggles, but through all of that, you're getting this picture of what fatherhood looks like from a like divinely inspired source.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of us, particularly in the West, are there's a large temptation to not recognize the blessing of children and I think it's a mindset shift when that I've had to go through. I'll tell you, your book and then the book I read right before yours is The World Needs a Father. I'll tell you, as a dad, if you want to get punched in the gut with a 1-2, you read The World Needs a Father and you read Family Revision, because what your book has really done is it challenged me the way I look at my children and to be more like this, like Abraham. I mean, it was like you said, it was full of emotion, the fact of not being able to have a child, and then once he had a child, and of course the story goes on into what God called him to do and like that whole process, right? But I'll tell you, the part that I'm even currently struggling most with, that your book has been a huge blessing for me, your book in particular, is you are really challenging me to question my motivations and my level of selfishness in the way I interact with my family, a level that I didn't previously recognize or acknowledge, right? Like I felt like I'm a decent dad, very engaged. Like, I'm after we get off this podcast, I'm excited to not that I'm excited to get off the podcast with you, but I'm excited to get back home and just do my daily summer dad thing and just be with my kids. And but I realized reading your book, I'm like, man, I am very, very selfish. And a lot of it is societal and it's so imbued that I didn't even
Yeah.
know it was there on how I regard my children and how I think of them, leaving the house and what I can do when they leave, all that kind of stuff. And it's fascinating to me. And I don't know, hopefully you don't mind touching on that, but these roles that you identify and the family dynamic, I don't know if you went through a similar struggle as you started developing this, but man, I am a selfish human being, and it's being really portrayed through my family.
Well, yeah, 100%. There's really two ways to deal with selfishness. One way, of course, is to die to yourself and to try to just do your duty. I think another thing, though, and this is something I really believe, is that I think that it's better to really be eclipsed by a greater love, right? So, in other words, yeah, I love myself. I love my preferences, but there's something that I want to love more. There's something that I want to see as more meaningful, and I find that kind of transition is really what transforms my life. And so I had to go through a process of absolutely loving being a father and loving my children and loving this this family and loving my future grandchildren and my future great grandchildren. And so that process, that transition for me, it was this heart shift where, for me, it's very difficult to talk about being selfish in the same way I might have used to talk about it, because what our culture teaches us is that we're all individuals, and that's primarily your identity. You are, and so it's important that you see yourself as an identity, as an individual, and that as you approach family life, then you want to be really careful not to lose yourself, because what's really important is your individual identity. And as long as you think this way, I don't know, it's almost like it's moral to be individually selfish, because you're breaking down the family into its various pieces. And it's almost considered selfish to give your children an identity that they haven't self-created. Now, nobody self-creates an identity. That's a sort of a modern myth. Identities are handed to you from others. And so oftentimes today, when families don't give our kids identities, they just pick them up, within their peer group, which is a disaster, because oftentimes those identities that are placed on our kids are placed there by children who aren't exactly wise or don't exactly have their best interests at heart. And so I want to just challenge the idea that my primary identity is as an individual. I think that I need to keep connection with that reality, that I am an individual, and that part of what I think a father needs to do is he needs to be the first mover in the family to subjugate and voluntarily subjugate his individual identity under his family identity. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you say, I'm primarily a father, I'm not primarily Jeremy and whatever kinds of things I want to associate in that bucket of identities. I care more about fatherhood and this identity that I've been granted by my children because they came into my life. Like, that's so much more meaningful than my individual identity. Once you start to really feel that in your heart and believe that, then all of a sudden the definitions of selfishness change, because I do care now, and this is a transition for me. I just care so much more about this family. Like I was having a debate with somebody, online. We were talking about Pride Month and just, some of the things that are frustrating about what happens this time of year. And, like routinely happens. This person reminded me that you're a cisgendered white Christian male, all these individual identities. And I just told them, gently, look, I don't care about any of those identities. I could care less. I'm a father and grandfather of a family. That's who I am. Those are the identities I identify with. And the reason why I am concerned about this ideology is because of what it's doing to my children and to my grandchildren and to my great grandchildren someday. Like that is the identity through which I'm viewing this issue. People don't even know that exists. Like, you can do that. No. You're an individual. That's all that matters. And so we are primarily these atomized individuals walking around. And I think this is what's destroyed the family, like more than anything else. Once you start to buy into that ideology, that we are primarily individuals, and that fatherhood and motherhood and sonship and daughterhood are all really small identities that you might feel a little bit or might give you a little bit of meaning or whatever, you've already lost. You've already pit yourself in some kind of weird negotiation as an individual against the other members of your family for the resources of the family to do your own individual thing. I don't know how that doesn't blow the family apart at some point, right? Somebody is either going to become the sort of doormat of that family, or the family is going to get blown apart. Those are the two options of the Western family. And so what we need to do, and I think fathers need to lead the way in this, is we need to say, look, I'm a father first, and I'm going to sacrifice first and sacrifice most for this family. I'm going to show you guys that when I go to work, I'm not here to provide to create some individual identity, to create some, to sort of fill some missing part of my soul. I go to work to provide for my family. And you guys are sending me out, and my goal here is to fuel this family, and I'm going to make sacrifices and make strategic decisions that are in the best interests of the family, not my best interests. And as you see me sacrificing in this way and identifying in this way, I'm going to call you to become a son, a daughter, a mother, a wife, like all these identities. I'm going to call over you, and we're going to inhabit those identities at a deep level. And this is what ancient families looked like. This is what they all did. And by the way, they had to do this to survive. Like, if they all did what we do in the West and started to identify as individuals, and they started to pull from the family resources, it would have destroyed those families, because they were really facing survival issues. Now, because we don't face survival issues, you could become atomized and just think about your individual identity, and your family won't starve. So this has to be a voluntary choice now, which is really hard for people to understand. And this is why we have to explicitly talk about what is more important. Like, is your individual identity more important, or do you want to nest all those things underneath your identity as a father?
So why the difference? Why is it so different over in the Arab nations in Israel than here in Western society? And what happened? Like what caused such a major shift to where we are now in Western society?
Yeah, I think it was what sociologists call the assumption of stability. So once you assume stability, once you think to yourself, and this happens to immigrant families all the time that come to the West, right? So you'll have, somebody coming from Asia or Africa or South America in a much more survival context. They'll be extremely family oriented. And then they'll come to the West and they'll suddenly realize that we won't starve if everyone sort of does their own thing. And then, of course, everything in our culture is designed around the individual. Every show is designed around specific demographics. Every shopping experience, school itself, most ministries and churches, and almost every sport. I mean, try to find a family sport where you get to compete as a full family team. We could talk about that. There are some, but people don't even know they exist. So everyone gets atomized in our culture. And if you do that, there's not a huge cost to it initially. You don't see the cost. And so that's when it's really kind of tragic. You hear these stories from immigrants all the time where these parents are killing themselves, almost sometimes literally, to give their kids a better life. And then as soon as their children grow up, they leave their family in the dust and saying, well, that's unhealthy, mom, dad, for you to want more from me or to want to have this kind of deeper interdependent relationship with me. I'm an individual, and so I think we have this ideology that's very deep. And so there are cultures, and it's interesting, with all the countries in the world, there's only one Western nation in the entire world, one developed country, where the birth rate is above replacement. You guys know where that is? Israel. Israel's the only one. So to answer your question, Stu, it's Abraham. This is why I'm telling you guys, this is such an important thing. If you do not begin to develop an Abrahamic vision for family and you live in the West, your family's days are numbered, because you're going to devalue children and your family line is going to become extinct. And so we're seeing that happen. Right now in Korea, for example, it takes, I think, 100 Koreans to produce 3 great grandchildren. Their birth rate is at 0.8 and falling. And so, sorry, 0.8. So it takes 2.1 to get to replacement rate. So you can see that that's actually an exponential curve. It's not just like a slow, decline. At that level, it's going to fall off a cliff in 2 generations. And so, and this is not just for Korea. They're sort of ground zero of this problem, but it's happening in virtually every European country. It's happening in Japan is almost as bad as Korea. And then the United States, it's plummeting as well, below replacement rate. The only reason why we're not seeing a population decline here is because of immigration. So this is going to be the problem that our children and grandchildren are going to face. And demographers are absolutely shocked at how fast this is happening. They have no idea what to do about it. They're looking at Israel and trying to understand what is it that happens in the Middle East? Why is there a durable multi-generational family passion in this culture? And I'm telling you, it's Abraham. Abraham has a vision for family. And what's really weird is that there's 3 Abrahamic faiths, so-called, right? Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And if you look at the way that Jewish and Arab men think about fatherhood, if they are observant, they are very keyed in on Abraham as a model for how to think about fatherhood. But within Christianity, a supposed Abrahamic religion, we don't do that. We have adopted the sterilizing, modern Western, hyper-individualized vision of family that our culture has, even though we have divine revelation to tell us and show us how to think about fatherhood. We have somehow, for some reason, we have completely neglected the scriptures when it comes to what it says about this role. And it's even more obvious than Abraham. I mean, when God created the first family, he literally gave it a purpose statement. He creates the first man and woman in Genesis 1:28. He tells them, blesses them and tells them, be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule the earth. This is a very interesting description of the purpose of family, that we're to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill, subdue, and rule. This idea is so clear that what he's talking about is a team. There's to work together. He's telling this to a family. It's multi-generational because it can't be accomplished in one generation. And he's telling them to multiply. It's clearly multi-generational. And so the nature of family, even when God designed it, he gave it a purpose statement that is a multi-generational team on mission. So this is the really quick way we like to describe what the family is. The modern Western family, the best analogy to understand it is that, we think of it as a nest. So nest is one way to think about the family. And man, the idea of the family as a nest could not be less attractive to men. I totally understand why men are like, I want to give my family for this nest that's primarily a maternal sort of idea where you nurture the chickies until it blows apart and resets every generation. Like that's not that exciting. And it's not really what men were designed to do. Men were designed to lead and build teams, that things that really last. Like there's a visionary aspect of fatherhood that's critical. And you see that with Abraham. And so if you want to fulfill this very clear set of commands given to the family to multiply, to fill, subdue, and rule, to lead your family in that way, then you have to totally rethink what family is. You can't continue to think about family the way Western people think about family.
What's fascinating to me is it's almost as simple as a mindset shift, right? And what I mean by that is, if your primary identifier is as a father, right, as a daddy, and that's what you embrace, inevitably you are going to want it ties directly to that population issue, right? It ties directly to, wow, dude, if my number one identity and passion in life is a dad, then I'm gonna want to continue to have more and more kids. Not necessarily for the practice of having kids, that being passionate about that. It's the kid, it is the quiver, right? It is exactly what, and it's fascinating to me how I think even if you're a non-believer, if you identify as a dad, we're built to pursue the things that we that are our passions, right? That we identify as. And if it's a military officer, then you have stars on your mind, right? You have, okay, I want to be an admiral or a general, whatever, if you're in a lower service. But as a top service Navy guy, you want to be an admiral, right? Like that's your goal. And if kids, or if being a dad is your goal, the natural byproduct of that is children. And it's a fascinating thing because I don't think, I'll tell you, for me recently, it was we talk about in the Connect Man all the time in our men's group. We often change when we're exposed to an idea that's better.
Right.
And it's just not, no one's ever said, it's not celebrated. People don't say, hey, dude, like dad is the
Right.
coolest thing ever.
Yes.
But even reading your book, like just recently in the last week or so, my mindset has shifted and it's been dramatic. Like it's really causing me. I mean, it's hard to frame it in the question I asked you earlier. Right? Or I guess the statement that your book has challenged me to reassess my motives. But I can honestly say that with that challenge, I've changed my thinking, and with the change in thinking, like I look at my kids very, very differently. I mean, it's had very practical there have been very practical outcomes in the last week by just thinking of, hey, I'm a dad first.
Right.
And
That's it
it's
right there.
fascinating, right?
Yes.
It's not radical. And my question, my next question for you is Stu and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm like, man, I as we were talking, I was thinking of Ecclesiastes, the Hevel, the life is a mist, it's grabbing smoke. And I'm like, man, I'm like hopeless. Like, this is a tidal wave, a societal tidal wave. How do we turn this? How do we turn the current trends? Because I personally don't think, I think 60 in 10 years, we're gonna be like, man, remember back when the fatherless rate was 60? I'd love to get back there. Because I
Right.
don't see I don't see how we change the tide. I'm just curious, how do we do this?
Yeah. I think our job as the church is to be light in a dark world. And sometimes the more dark the world, the clearer the gospel is. And so I don't know that it's a disadvantage. What's really dangerous is when when the church becomes like the world. So then a darkening world is very threatening because it's infected us. And I think this is where we're going to have to somehow figure out how to separate, kind of like, Rod Dreher's book, the Benedict option, or my wife and I were just in Amish country, and we go about once or twice a year, and the primary thing I'm doing is for my soul. I sit there and watch some Amish guy. I watched this amazing scene of this guy with like these four giant horses, and he was pushing them. I saw all of these scenes of like kids working together and playing together, and just and so I just look at those scenes. I don't want to be Amish, but one of the things I love about watching the Amish is it reminds me we're in a free country, and if they can do that, then we can certainly build a different kind of family. Like it's all our choice. We're the ones who've decided to capitulate to the culture. We're the ones who decided to give into all of these ideas and to not look at scripture and to look at other ways of other trends that are really popular, things like gentle parenting or whatever, sort of like our diet. Like we don't remember any ancient things about food, and so we are just at the whims of any kind of industrial food culture. We are also at the whims of any industrial or political or psychological parenting culture. Like, and so Christians are just carried along because we don't, part of this is this separation that we've experienced from our Hebraic root structure. The New Testament says some amazing things that is very helpful. The very direct thing it says to fathers, do not exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training of the Lord. I think is super helpful. But most of the content, especially about multi-generational family, is in the Hebrew scriptures, right? The Old Testament. And so to the degree that we have unhitched from the Old Testament, or we have not really understood its purpose, and when Paul said all scripture is God breathed and is useful for teaching, for training, for correcting, for rebuking in righteousness. Like when he said that, he was talking about the Hebrew scriptures. And so they were the curriculum that the Jewish believers were using to disciple the new Gentile Christians into a Hebraic understanding of family. And we have made a decision in the West, in the Protestant world especially, but also I think in the Catholic world and in other denominations, to completely ignore the Hebraic root structure of our faith. And by doing that, we've really unhitched ourselves from a biblical understanding of family. And so it leaves us vulnerable to the darkening culture. So I'm very excited about the future. I'm excited about our family. I don't really see any forces that are at work that can penetrate the family in a predictable way that is rooted and grounded in Scripture, and is inspired by the gospel. We have the best story. We have divine revelation. We have the Holy Spirit. I mean, it's amazing all the advantages we have. And so I don't see any reason not to be hopeful. But yeah, the world is going to get darker, and so we need to become careful and thoughtful about how we're leading our families to be a light in a darkening world.
Well, let's be honest. The Old Testament probably isn't as easy to read as the New Testament. I mean, Leviticus is one of my favorite books. It's I read it over
Yes.
and over and over again.
Same.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about let's shift to your mission and what you're doing about this. Let's talk about Family Inc. and what that looks like. What is that, and how do people find out about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So me and my partner, Jeff Bethke, our families, the Bethkes and the Pryors started family teams. And so we've so the main reason why we started, this organization is to do exactly what you guys were describing. That is just to let people know that there is a biblical blueprint for family that is just unknown in Western culture. So our mission is to restore the biblical blueprint of family. It's not we're here just to explain to people there's a choice. I mean, I just think about what kind of father I would be if I didn't encounter those Jewish fathers when I was 23 years old living in Jerusalem. I can't even yeah, I shudder to think. I just didn't value children. I was so hyper individual. I still struggle a lot with this stuff, like hyper individualism. I was raised in a culture in the West Coast that just celebrated that. And so that was very difficult for me. So I just want people to know that there is a different way of thinking about family. And then the next thing that happens though, is that when people begin to they get an understanding, they have this mindset shift that you were talking about, David. Once that happens to people, then they open up their toolbox for how to lead their family as a team, as a multi-generational team on mission. And it's empty because all of our tools culturally assume that we're building the nest version of family towards individualism and then launching kids out, and then hitting the reset button every generation. So it's very difficult to figure this out. So what we've done is we've collected tools that we've learned from cultures like the Israelis, or like a lot of ancient families and places in the world that have done family in a very durable and healthy way, multi-generationally. Tools like the meal, like having a weekly multi-generational meal, tools like actually writing a family mission statement and values so that you can actually craft a unique culture, how to like lead your family in terms of time. There's lots and lots of tools that we developed. Family Inc. is one of those tools because oftentimes when people start to have this shift, they begin to realize, okay, I'd love to live with my family as a team, but we are all becoming hyper individualized. And a lot of it is because I'm working 50, 60 hours a week. My wife might be working, my kids are all in school. We just don't see each other very often. I mean, I spend more time with my coworkers than I do with my family. My kids spend more time with their peers at school than they spend with me. What do we do about that? And so part of what we did with Family Inc. is I'm just like, guys, I mean, I had that epiphany. I cried out to God. I just said, God, please help me go through a transition. And I did really, like, praise God. I got a business idea late one night that just came out of the blue, and it changed the trajectory of our whole family. And so I've seen many families go through a transition where they begin to think about building assets that they can steward and build as a family team. And so a lot of people are not wired to be entrepreneurs. And so we started Family Inc. to help kind of walk you through patterns that somebody who's not an entrepreneur, not wired to necessarily be a hyper creative problem solver, how they can begin to build assets so they, for the purpose of really spending time together as a family. So yeah, that's the huge part of what we've been working on lately.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. I think the idea of not only training people in a way that meets the provision aspect of what a lot of us are geared towards and focus on, but the time piece. I think we underestimate just the time piece spending. And what's fascinating is we underestimate it, but we don't apply the same filters to like YouTube or the other social media outlets. It's something that I think is just an awareness thing. And I think the thing that I love about your message, probably what I love most about what you're doing, is that it is achievable, right? It's not something that is outside of our grasp. It's not something that
Right.
it's not idealistic. It's idealistic because it's in contrast to what the reality of our current society puts out. But in all reality, it's not that difficult to achieve.
Right.
We can all do it, right? Anybody can
With this one.
go to your program.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. We actually live in a better time now to do this than we have in probably over 100 years. I mean, you think about things, something like homeschooling, which was basically illegal for a long time. Now all of a sudden there's all kinds of support structures for that. When we were if you try to build assets like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was a lot harder because it was more of a manufacturing based industrial economy. You needed a lot of capital to start a business. There's all kinds of businesses you can start today. We have a whole library in Family Inc. of ones that have actually worked for current family teams that have done this. And it's much easier now than it has been in other times. And so yeah, I'm very optimistic about this. It is the mindset that needs to shift. That is the difficult part. But the actual different things you get to do, I find it is not that complicated. It's very much within our grasp.
Is fanny pack modeling one of the businesses on that list of family businesses?
Because we've not made any money on it yet. We've not
Yeah?
made any money on
We,
it yet.
we're
but
not
we are
there
trying.
yet.
Oh, this is David's.
This
business?
this is a multi-family, multi-generational plan. Fanny pack modeling for the Graziers and the Gutierrezes.
Yeah.
Guys, do it. Yes.
Yeah, the
Hey,
other
look,
one is
Jeremy,
bouncy house business, bouncy castles. That's the other
we're
one.
very serious businessmen on this podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't want to paint a picture that I love it. I love it. And so tell us how someone gets plugged into Family Inc. and what they can expect the commitment to be.
Yeah. So every about 2 or 3 times a year, we open the cart. We try to limit it to just 100 families a year that go through the program. So you just go to familyteams.com, click Family Inc., join the wait list. You'll be the first one to be notified, when it opens up. If you want to jump in, you can jump in. It's a 1-year program. We do 8 coaching calls a month. We have about a 40 video curriculum that kind of walks you step by step through the 7 steps, the family freedom path, we call it. You get access to that library of business ideas. We don't have any packs on there yet, but if you guys make a killing, then I'll I'll record a video and we'll put that in the library, and we'll get you guys some competition.
Yes.
So
Oh,
that's
and to be fair, we've only been trying this business for like the last 7 years. So I don't think we've get enough time to really
get some more
incubate.
time.
That's
Just
great.
curious, so David and I are we invest in real estate a lot. I'm assuming that, real estate is a topic that you guys hit on, and a section of your book does talk about, just investing in these multi-generational assets. And it really just got me thinking even more so about, as a family, how do I get my children involved in investing in real estate and kind of teaching them, what we're doing, and looking at, more
Yes.
like land options and stuff like that. And it was exciting to me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about real estate is that a lot of the downsides of real estate, and the main reason why people are like, I'd rather invest in the stock market or some other paper asset, is because it's work. You got to rehab a house, you got to like deal with tenants. The cool thing about that is that then requires lots of skilled people. And so I find that what is a negative for a lot of people in investing in real estate, once your kids get to a certain age, it becomes a positive. And so we have families in Family Inc. that have like flipped houses together with all their kids, their sons and daughters working. And I think it's a great asset class for investing. If you want to build a team, I mean, it's like sometimes you get involved with something that's way over your head, and you got to get your family together and say, guys, like, I'm sorry, we're have to work a lot of hours together. We gotta build assets. This is something I want for generations, that this is going to produce income for our family. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. In the way that we approach the whole idea of investing in Family Inc. is, so we encourage people to, we tell them, businesses, you don't start a business, you start three businesses. And basically what happened is we've seen virtually everyone who's been successful do the same thing. I didn't invent this. I just watched it happen over and over again. Like our family did it after hitting some dead ends and going through some really tough years of business ownership. Then I saw other families in our area that we were all collaborating do it. And so basically the three businesses are, the first one I call a freedom business, which is sort of like often a service-based business based more on your time. Those are very easy to start. You can pull all the money out every month. Usually require almost no capital to start. So it's a great way to get business experience. It's a great way to get free from an employer. There's lots of opportunity. They're regional. They're less competitive. And so there's hundreds of ideas that you can often do, especially if you live in a populated area, of a service-based business that you can get started. We've got guys who have started, really awesome businesses they have very little experience. And so there's lots of ways to do that. So once you spend like a year or two getting that going, then we encourage you to start a scale business. One of the problems with service-based businesses is that, they just are so tied to your time. And so it's difficult to get time freedom in a service business. It's also difficult to get the level of like leverage or money to really invest a lot in real estate, to buy assets with those down payments together. So then we encourage you to start a scale business. So a scale business is any kind of business idea or process that doesn't tie the income that's generated directly to your time. This could be scaling your service business. You could like have 3 or 4 crews going by by a certain time if you've got a lot of opportunity in your area. But there's a lot of ideas of scale businesses. So, fanny packs, that would be in the scale business category. It's not tied directly to your time. It could really take off, or you might, see you're putting time in and you're not getting anything out. Like scale businesses are that way. And so we encourage people to do that as a second business. And then the third business is a legacy business. And that's where you create an investment thesis that you and your family are really trying to understand. This is where we put our money, and this is where we maximize a return on our investment. These are when we buy capital intensive assets like real estate. And so that's the process that we take our families through, so that they can do this in a way that is less risky. Because what most people think of when they think of being an entrepreneur or starting a business is 99% of the time they assume you're talking about a scale business, and they're looking at Shark Tank and they're thinking about tech startups, and they're like, I don't have an idea like that's going to change the world. It's going to be some giant unicorn that's going to blow up and make us $1 billion. That sounds really risky and like it's really unlikely. And so I understand why they're thinking that. That's why we tell people, look, that's not the way. The vast majority of small businesses are not like that, right? They are basic service-based businesses that are regional. And so if you do that and you learn business that way, we find it a lot easier to get to success.
That's awesome. I love I love the holistic approach to the training. And I'll tell you, Jeremy, I just looked at the clock and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we've gone on almost an hour already. And I'll tell you, we would love to have you back on because I think there's just, I want to leave you with some encouragement. One, the book, absolutely. Well, you've got a couple books out, all amazing. We both have copies of your other books as well. But the books are amazing. The website, obviously the Family Inc., the training, you are training people how to make true impact, right? And a big part of that is, I mean, we're obviously as men and dads, my mind went to the father focused parts of the book, but the idea of the family and just that the impact that will resonate through eternity with what you're doing is so fascinating. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's purely the hand of God, right? I mean, God is blessing you, but you are also a tool through which He is blessing so many families, and so we're just extremely grateful for you and the heart that you have to redeem families. It's very powerful. And we're humbled that you join us. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Yeah. Praise God. Thank God that He provided us with this information. Like, we want to dive into it, but I really thank you for that encouragement. Thanks, David.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's an accident that God used Abraham, a man who couldn't have kids until his 80s, and Jeremy, a guy who was like, dude, kids are gross. I don't even want that, to really make such a powerful movement. So thank you.
Guys and gals, hey, reach out to Jeremy. We'll put all of his information in the show notes. Read his books, multiple books. They are awesome. They will change the way you look at family and dive into Family Inc., family teams. Jeremy, thanks again, man.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
See ya.